The Sihar here, tagged, Osrith declared, suddenly, surprising herself. And they were fair frightening me last night. Can't you feel them, all in the glen, rushing up, and down? The tall, blonde warrior stood upright and stared at Osrith. What you felt, that was the Morrigan. The Morrigan, the great Queen Maka. She rushes about when she wants to warn a man. Warn me? Osrith shuddered. About what? The king, Fergus said, surprisingly. You should not trust the king, Osrith. Osrith stared into Fergus's wide, honest face. What did he mean? The Morrigan comes to warn of battle, Tagged explained. Osrith felt indignant. I am not afraid of. If she came to you, Tagged continued, ignoring her protestation, then you are linked to a fight, a struggle, or perhaps surrounding the coronation. She is queen of land and earth. She is who Lord Domhnall will wed to tomorrow. He drew Osrith close to, his ale-sore eyes wide. Wed? Yes, she agreed. As a Flan Sinner had done at Tara, spiritually, to the land. And Eochaid had not done that, so he hadn't the authority over the land as Domhnall would have, neither then support of the nobles from Pitland. Even the Strathclyde Cymric would find it hard to remain with Eochaid, even with Gurrick's leadership. Some may even change sides. Did you hear a crow? See a crow? Last night? Osrith shook her head, trying to think. No. Yes. There might have been. It was dark. Then her mind drifted to Greog Air. The look he gave her. Osrith knew there was something to do with him. Something more. What was it? This was something more than anger at the loss of a man. Was Maka warning her of him? Take care, Tagged said, his ice blue eyes fixing on Osrith. Stay close to us, until we leave this place. Osrith nodded, and they hurried to saddle and rein the rest of their horses. 88,888,888. The day was a beautiful one. The sun shone warmly on Osrith's face as it rose steadily into the forget-me-not blue sky. Even though it was the middle of November, the chill of the night had given way to a mild coolness. The procession from Glenorchy to Dund, following the glen, meant that they were protected from most of the coldness that would have been felt had they ridden through the empty mountainous landscape, which filled Osrith with joy. It was a land built for skirmish and almost impossible, she imagined, for offence to be effected. Kings were kings because they were accepted. No one could rule Dalriada without consent, for rebels could easily flee to the hills. Dalriada, Domhnall's kingdom, sheltered by the mountains enclosing around them like protective hands. It would take less than a day for their procession to reach the Hillfort. Their line was led by the priest who had accompanied Domhnall from Iona. Behind, on a cart, was the red sandstone block, cut from Leofaril, the huge stone at Tara around which the kings had knelt, who had offered themselves as High King on cart. It was to go with Domhnall to a place on the border of the three kingdoms, Osrith knew, and Dalriadan power would be conveyed to the stone at Domhnall's coronation. All who saw the stone would know it had also been made one with the earth of the Gales, and would know that whoever was crowned on it was true king of Dalriada for all time. On the lower hills to Athernush, farmers, tended beasts every so often little rivulets of water hurried and spurted on the way to the green sea. The roan gelding had been given to Osrith to ride from Glenorchy. Tagged helped her up onto the saddle and she managed to position it next to Fergus before the procession get underway. Osrith was concerned with holding on and keeping her balance, but she was fairly sure she sensed every Cambilaich and Macreog air watching her. But she didn't. And as they passed the valley rocks on their way south, the sea always on the right, they just looked to Osrith like ordinary rocks, not the terrifying, not soul-gripping monsters she had imagined in the part moonlight of the night before. That, or her misgivings about Greogair, had translated into the landscape, for it was his fortress, after all. Osrith was certain that there was something more than an alliance. The death of a kinsman was in play here. Why would you let all your men drink and have no guards at your entrance, for instance? It was as if Greogair was inviting trouble. In any case, until they had got to Dund, Osrith was content to ride between Tagged and Fergus, though she was less convinced in this bright morning that the wind in the valley was anything more than that. The ride was as uncomfortable as Osrith remembered the ride the day before to be, and the one from Dunnottar to Glashku, Eochaid's palace. Domnall had taught her to grip the sides of the saddle with her knees, like Finoli had tried to teach her, and move with the horse. But the stony ground had proved bumpy and the pressure on legs was hard. It took all her effort to use her knees to keep up with them, and eventually, Tag noticed, dropping his pace a little to help. It helped Osrith to keep her mind on other things, on Dunnottar, on the landscape, for riding came more naturally to her when she didn't think about it. Domnall looked back at her once or twice as they journeyed, checking her riding, for he bent his knees into his own white mare to show Osrith how to keep her balance better, and Osrith did so, correcting her posture from prone wobbliness to one of upright strength. Constantine had barely looked at her. Flanking Domnall, the prince rode straight as a tree, hardly moving as his horse rode on. Osrith wondered what the cursing had been about between them the day before. It was near sunset when the procession turned a corner and a hill came into sight. Lying high, yet low enough to be an island in the clouds, this was Osrith's first memory of the hill fort they were to make for there, surrounding the stone on which Domnall would be made one with the land. Then, a group of men rode towards them, galloping their horses as they drew nearer. Domnall was the first to pull his sword from his scabbard, and every man in his procession, including the abbot, drew their own steel. But the men were not riding armed, indeed, they were riding under a standard on whose cloth was embroidered a picture Osrith had seen before, its golden threads catching the evening sun as they slowed, their brows glistening with sweat from exertion. It was the Dunnottar guard carrying the Pictish flag. "We have ridden to find you," their leader called. Osrith strained to see who the man was, and, when she saw he was someone she recognized, copyright him. He was one of Sainid's warriors, and hurriedly, Osrith fought to scan each face before her. But the general and head of Dunnottar's guard was not amongst them. Swiftly they dismounted and knelt to Domnall, copyright him, explaining they had been searching for him, and he had brought forth their lords from every region of Pitland to kneel to him the next day. In addition, many Strathclyde Cymric nobles were with them. One of them, Enarin, offered his fortress, in direct opposition to Eochaid and Giric's rule. How pleased they all were at not having to camp, for that bright day would have yielded a cold night, and so the procession made its way to Dund, and to its stone at the centre, not placed there as Domnall would place the Tara stone, but an exposure of the basalt which made up the land in all directions. Osrith was pleased to be out of the saddle of her horse when the call to dismount was given, and she followed Domnall to the centre of the rock, protected as it was by passages beneath and walls around. An indentation in the shape of a man's footprint was at the very centre of the rock, and, beside it, ran a line off which was slashes, to the left or right, or sometimes slanted, single or in groups of up to 5. A small figure of a bull lay next to it. Constantine knelt by the markings and placed his fingers on them, running his hand upwards. It says, Constantine said, that he whosoever places his foot in the land with the consent of his people is joined to it for always. And the boar, she asked, it was put here by the Picts. Domnall's voice came from behind them. Osrith turned to Lunatar King, but he was looking past her, at the king's stone, where his father Constantine had placed his foot, here as had his uncle, Constantine's father, and their father, who was carried to the stone by the Pictish lords, such as he had been exalted by them, Sainid Mac-Pin. This was their place, of strength and might with the land. The man crowned here as the king of the Gaels is implicitly king of the Picts. A murmur of approval came from behind Domnall. The Pictish lords were around him, giving him their assent. Osrith turned back to the stone and knelt, placing her fingers on the boar, following its dynamic, running form with her fingers. Then, she the line of markings with her eyes as they glowed red with the setting sun. It must have been the Ogham Domnall had told her about, the marks that represented Gaelish, older than the Pictish images, or even the words written in the manuscript, sewn together and constructed when they had been at the monastery in Kells. They are the oldest written marks from of our language, Domnall said softly. These are our tongue. They are even before the Taliesin, Taliesin? Osrith asked. The CHRONOLOGICal negation. The storyteller of the Strathclyde Cymric. Domhnall shifted from foot to foot as the setting sun made the marks seem even more deeply embedded. These marks were written even before the first book of the Britons. It was the first thing ever written by our people when they arrived at these shores. A declaration of connection to the land was first of all written down, in the rock. It is there now, and ever. Prayers were said in the twilight, as the sandstone block was unloaded, blessings by this abbot that, through his ordination, back through the generations of ordinations, priest to priest, Comsill himself reached out to this royal stone. It will be put at the boundary of the three kingdoms, Pitland, Dulriada and Strathclyde, Domhnall said, as the failing light was only just enough to mount their horses. That will not please Eochaid and Giric. F.A. Copyright Hillim replied, a laugh in his voice. Indeed it will not. There was a change in Domhnall, Osrith thought, as he followed the guard from Dunnottar and Inaran down the hill and to the fortress where they were to spend the night. Whether it was gravity of being crowned, or the battles that would follow. Battles which were to come. The Strathclyde Cymric were kinged by his cousin Eochaid had as much right to his own throne through being Eotildilpin's kin. Domhnall was determined to preserve Eochaid if he gave him fealty. 88,888,888. But not Giric. The stables were to be their beds for the night and, after the Cambulacha and the MacGregors stabled their horses, Osrith, Fergus and Stag took theirs, led by Inaran's men to a fortress by the river at the bottom of Dund. They held no torchlight, for they did not wish enemies to know their way, and Osrith gripped the reins of her horse as he nimbly navigated over the rocky ground. As they rode their horses along the glen to a turreted castle, Osrith thought about Giric, the wily-faced man who had sat with them at Eochaid's table, as distant a claimant to the Pictish throne as Osrith herself, and on which connection he based his claim. The night they had stayed at Glashcu, Eochaid's fortress, Giric had set a trap. Finoli had woken them and they had raced for waiting boats in the Clyde. No mention had been made by Domhnall about preserving Giric's life. This was politics. Domhnall was right that it took its place next to warfare, directing it, adjusting to it. The best leader could observe the environment, orient their forces where they needed them to be, decide on strategy and where to use them. When the army fought, that was the final step which the preparation led up to, and some leaders had very little time to act. After washing down the horses and putting them to feed, Fergus hurried to find them, insisting they were to attend Domhnall. They found him in a chamber just off a large hall, which was filling with delicious smells of cooking food. Osrith hoped some of that would be coming her way. Domhnall, clothed in his blue cloak, with Constantine and Domhnall either side, was seated on the oak throne of Dunnottar, which had made it safely from Glenorchy. He ushered them into the chamber and told them so. A feast was being held in his honor, so he wished to tell them important news before they ate. It went like this: after the coronation the next day, Domhnall would be marching as head of his army to Scone. He would also be sending a peace envoy south, past Eochaid's country to the new king in Cumbraland. King Guthred, a Dane, now a Christian, was chosen as king of Dirria at York, and, too, of Cumbraland. He was once slave to Eochaid, so I wish to ascertain whether we can ally. He looked at his three warriors, a serious expression on his features. I send you, my three warriors, because I can trust no one more. You will be welcomed at Culligwillad. You will meet Bishop Eardred, in whose vision Cuthbert came to plant the face of Guthred as king. Cuthbert? Osrith asked, astonished. Which saint is that? Tagd asked. He's Northumbria's saint, Osrith told him, her heart filling with excitement. He is as dear to us as Comsill is to you. Then her brain kept her emotion in check. If Bishop Eardred was in a position to declare this Danish man as king, what about Elfric? Did he still hold Bibbenberg? Dirria was Northumbrian and Northumbria long claimed Cumbraland. Yes, Domhnall agreed, glancing a nod to Osrith, which is why he has the support of the people. You will not be alone. I am sending 2 other warriors from my now vast array of supporters with you. Domhnall's voice sounded full of joy, proud of his support. Then, he lowered his head, as if to confide something crucial. Osrith, with Fergus and Tagged, drew nearer. For this, you are the three people I trust most. I have gifts for Guthard, a promise of border recognition when I regains throne. So, this king, Guthard, would never need fear of a war on his northern border, if he agreed to an alliance with Domhnall against Eochaid. Osrith thought that was a gift worth having. There is more. Two Norse brothers of the name Thorgilson threaten to ally with Eochaid. They feel slighted by Harthknut, Guthard's father, for they believe that he promised them Cumbraland. I need to establish their position in Cumbraland, and whether they are a threat to Alba more than any other Norse, of course. And so, Domhnall's tone changed from instructive to welcoming, and he leaned back, arms open wide as if embracing them. Tagged, Fergus, to the hall. Aneurin will make you welcome, for we are to feast well tonight. When her warriors at arms had left, Domhnall beckoned Osrith closer. That is more I need from you, Osrith. I can ask no other. Yes, Lord King. When you are in Caeligwylid, Cleol, there is more than friendship and elegance that I need you for. Caeligwylid's monastery has a vast repository of manuscripts. I know you can read, Osrith, and I have sent word to Guthard that you are a training scholar at Culdees and wish to read the Cumbric histories. Osrith nodded. What I need from you is to spy, Osrith. Read everything that you can learn more Cumbric. Anything you can find out will be of value. Do you understand? Yes, Lord King. Osrith nodded, feeling disappointment flood through her. I will not see you crowned. Domhnall held a hand out to her, smiling kindly to her, and she took it. I know you wish to. But to do this, you are the only person I can send, can read 4 languages and you can write them. You can fight. No one else loyal to me can do that. And Eochaid and Girik. Osrith didn't mean to ask, and she dropped Domhnall's hand, and took a step back, as the king-elect's face clouded. Then, he smiled, brightly. They are at Dunnottar, Domhnall admitted, but are having difficulty holding off Norse attacks. Of those in Pitland who supported Girik, many are now in support of me. Eochaid's Gorsers were too few to defend both Strathclyde and Pitland, and the Picts got few defenders. Harold Finehair has set up in the east, and this has disaffected the Pictish people to those who have declared themselves king. Then I would fight. Osrith gave it one last shot, even though she knew it would be rebutted by her king before she had finished saying the word. Then your role will be more than I need. He stood up suddenly, and approached Osrith. Will you go? It wasn't a command. It was Domhnall as her leader, who Osrith had chosen to follow. I understand the risks to myself as a girl. Osrith nodded. Woman, Domhnall corrected, looking over her form. She was starting to curve in the waist and hips, and out at the chest, and this was becoming a problem. Her breeches, which had survived from when she had first been given them, in the battle where she had taken Constantine's place, when Ivar Lothbrokson was killed by Domhnall. They were tight over her hips, and shirt over chest. Osrith had not seemed to have lost the larger breasts she had acquired on pregnancy, and wished they were smaller, like when she had first escaped Elfric. Heavy and inconvenient. Why did she even have them when she would never be a mother? It was true what she had told Domhnall. She would wish one day to wake as a man. Your clothes are too small for you, Osrith. I will have more for you. I will go to Caeligwylid for you, Osrith replied. I am your warrior and I will do as you ask. Domhnall stepped towards her and took up her hands, and held them firmly in his own, exhaling deeply. Take no unnecessary risks. Do not reveal yourself to be a woman, but don't deny it if you are discovered, for this will make Eardred and Guthard disbelieve everything. Stick to the plan, Guthard. We need as an ally the Norse Thorgilson brothers. If we can get them on our side, would make reclaiming the throne cost fewer lives. Osrith nodded. That was important. The fewer Domhnall may lose on the way with a battle against the Norse could make the difference between success and failure when, inevitably, Eochaid and Girik battled Domhnall. I will try for peace, Osrith. On the way to Scone we have sent word to Eochaid to meet him in Glasgow. We will try to form a peace. And if not, war, Domhnall confirmed. And Constantine? Osrith's mind drifted to their argument the day before, at Glenorchy. It was Constantine's idea, Domhnall replied, Riley. Whatever it takes to secure our grandfather's throne. One day it will be his, for when I have a son, he will not be old enough to assume the throne before my cousin. And I do not wish there to be war, like in Iran. All of it was Constantine's idea, and it is brilliant. Domnall smiled, and walked towards the chamber door, gesturing through it towards the feasting hall. Osrith left, with her new mission, to not stand by Domnall as he was united with the Morrigan, but instead follow Constantine's plan. One day in the near future, Osrith would have cause to remember Domnall's very definite emphasis if the word all 88,888,888. Osrith tagged stood up, calling her over in welcome. The hall, lit by candles, was full of men, of the Pictish warriors, the Griogers and Cambulach, of the Strathclyde nobles who owned the fortress and had turned to Domnall. Platters and cups were over tables and men over platters, talking, laughing, roaring loud declarations to one another. It had not got to the singing stage yet, and Osrith promised herself she would be well away up to the stables when that began, for she did not wish the MacGregor and Cambulach men to remember their feud with her. Yet, as she stood by her comrades in arms, she felt many eyes on her, mainly MacGregor, AMD mumbling and pointing. Tagged pulled her down. We will be gone tomorrow, he counselled Osrith. You are with, he pointed between himself and Fergus, good company. Osrith smiled as Fergus pulled her up a chair and put a wooden plate before her containing bread and cheese. Osrith thanked him gratefully and ate. They had not stopped to eat all day and the smell of the food had suddenly made her hungry. And, yes, she was with her friends. Why should she care about them? They were all on Domnall's side. To the three warriors, Domnall's trusted men, Fergus got to his feet, however, and clashed her wooden drinking cup and then tagged before turning and toasting the rest of the room. One or two of the Cambulach made to get to their feet, but were pulled back down by others. Fergus grinned defiantly, glugging back the contents. Clearly, they had been drinking longer than Osrith. And so had the men who now joined them, Copyright Illim, the man who had knelt to Domnall that day, Drostan and Uunst. All three were Sainid's household guard, and she remembered them from the feast after her first battle, where Ivar died, her first feast, where Sainid had treated her wounds. She remembered the touch of the general's fingers on her hand that evening as she waited on the warriors. That same evening Constantine had tricked her to lie next to him in bed, then pushed himself in and out of her. Sainid, Osrith thought, suddenly, pushing her empty plate away. How was he? Did he still live? Osrith tagged exclaimed as three men sat round the table with their You remember these warriors? Osrith looked amongst the men, Picts who she knew, and nodded. She had trained against Copyright Illim and Uunst, under Sainid's supervision. But they didn't know her. Osrith, Copyright Illim looked confused. But you were. It was over a year ago, Osrith replied. I've grown. I'll say you've grown, commented Uunst, which earned him a thump in the arm from Osrith as Fergus, as warrior in arms, rose to do the same. Uunst took his chair with a nod to Osrith, in acceptance of his insult towards her, and warriors in arms always stood to a slight against one of their own. May I ask ... Sainid. Osrith looked between the other two Pictish guards. The general? He lives, confirmed Copyright Illim. He fought Gerek but would not fight Eochaid, being at Pin. But we escaped, because we tricked them that we were dead after the last Norse battle. Two brothers. Two Norse brothers? Osrith asked, interested, pricking up her ears. Yes, nodded Copyright Illim, drinking deeply from his tankard. Attacked Culdies then, went begot no joy from the monks who forced them back from the outer perimeter wall, so they crossed the water and attacked Dunnottar, but were repelled. They've gone all the way back to Eoferwick. We feigned death, Drostan continued. Took 3 bodies, did Sainid, buried them, pretending to be us. But we went to the Picts, and then across to Strathclyde. Many have followed us. Many more will come as Domnall crosses the land. Eochaid will not expect to battle in winter, but the Pictish warrior broke off as the royal chamber door opened. Enarin, The castle's lord strode first, chestnut brown hair glowing in the candlelight. Behind him, Domhnall strode, swathed in his blue cloak, looking taller than Osrith remembered. Behind Domhnall, as if in procession, were Constantine, Domhnall and Greogair. Domhnall looked magnificent. As one, the men before him rose, giving him respect as befitting his rank. He waited until he had everyone's undivided attention and then spoke. Gales of the land. There was a cheer from several men, Picts, another cheer, and Cymric. This last group gave the loudest cheer. We have assembled here, at this site, Dund, ceded to our ancestors long ago, that we would be protectors, guardians of this land. Domhnall looked between groups of his Diaparat warriors, all come from many different parts of the country, all there because they wanted him. Domhnall Mac Corstin knew A tilde negation A tilde Ilpin as their king. Not one man looked from him, not one unwavering in their pledge to serve him. No, Osrith noticed, there was one. Greogair was staring right at her. Tomorrow, I will join in union with our land. Domhnall continued to look right back at him, so determined she would not make eye contact with Greogair. She could go, quickly, and if anyone waited for in the hayloft above the horses at this fortress, she would have time to hide somewhere else. Then, Osrith noticed food being brought in. Eat of the land, Domhnall concluded, sweeping his arm in an arc as he announced the meal, which women were bringing and serving onto the wooden tables before them. It seemed to Osrith, as a platter was brought between the six of them at their table, to be a boiled sheep's stomach. Fergus, ever keen to eat, used a short knife, holding it like a dagger as he stabbed into the organ. Its guts of meat and oats slilled onto the platter. Dagice, Fergus declared. Even the peasants support Domhnall, commented Tagged, using his fingers to pick up some of the contents and drop a bit into his mouth, before reaching for a small jar, out of which he poured a little of its contents, spirit which burned Osrith's throat, which F.A. tilde copyright Hillim declared to be Uisjbetha, the welcome water which had used to toast his success in defeating Ivar Lothbrokson, where she had shamed Constantine fighting in his place. The evening played out with as much Tagice and Uisjbetha as they could manage, with toasts to each of Domhnall's warriors, with only the Macgreog airmen and the Cain Bilait rising in opposition to one another when they were hailed. As singing began, in praise of Sainid Mac Alpin, of battle, of wars and heroes of old, Osrith followed Tagged out to behind the hall, hanging back as he watered the woodwork, then leaning against it, relieved. She needed to tell someone what Domhnall had charged her with, and she asked him to wait as she did so. But Tagged did not greet her espionage with quite as much enthusiasm as Osrith had delivered it. You have had fair warning, he chided her, sternly. Osrith turned to go and he called after her. Are ye not on for drinking? I must sleep, even if you and Fergus can go all night on the Pure, and handle a boat tomorrow. She turned to walk back to the stable, but Tagged placed a hand on her shoulder. Osrith turned, preparing to be defensive. But his tone had changed and he put his arms out towards her protectively, unsteady from the spirit. He does ask too much of you, Osrith, that's all I'm saying. He looked at her up and down, considering what has happened to you. But Osrith did not want to hear it. He doubted her, her comrade in war. You may believe in the Morrigan if you wish. She shot back hotly, I do not. But almost as soon as she had turned to stalk off back to the hall, she regretted her harsh words to her friend, scorning his beliefs. She had been the cause of pain to flash over his features. Tagged walked past her, without saying anything more, and Osrith watched as Tagged trod the ground and ducked back in, without a backwards look. She sighed as she leaned back against the hall's wooden planks. Her head felt hot, and she regretted, too, drinking the Uisjbetha. She should go to sleep, she knew, but as she crossed the threshold of the hall, Osrith looked for their table. Tagged was seated now, and Fergus and 3 Pictish guards were still there. Should she sit with them again? But, before she had a chance to decide, a hand on her shoulder began to escort her in the opposite direction. Osrith's hand felt for Bue, but it was too late. Greogair MacDungan had pushed her down at an empty table near the royal princes. Osrith could hear Constantine talking matter-of-factly to Domhnall about Dunnottar Castle's architecture and grounds. Osrith's heart began to race and she made to get up, but an altogether different voice came from the man who had been nothing but hostile to her up to then, one of regret, and he sat on a stool a little away from her. "I am sorry my men beat you, girl," he began. His dark red head bowed. "I did not wish it, and I hope that didn't hurt you a great deal." "Nothing I couldn't handle," Osrith replied carefully as she inhaled, pain from her damaged ribs catching her chest. "Just say sorry to Taggart and do as he says." A warning came, in Osrith's mind. He said to stick with Hin and Fergus, do it, even if it means spending all night here. "And, you are a warrior, girl." "Yes." Greogair looked up, his hair falling by his ears. "Here, drink." Greogair offered, taking a jug of usbetha from a servant, who was clearly taking it to Domhnall's table. The woman's shoulders dipped and she turned quickly, as an Aaron looked in her direction, clearly waiting for it, and he watched as Greogair poured out an aliquot for Osrith into a cup resting on that table, before taking the whole jug to his own lips. Despite her first thoughts screaming from her cerebellum to get up and go, Osrith reached out for the cup, sipping at the usbetha carefully. "You have fought bravely, on Iona to protect the Belarshbeag there," he went on. "The small boy, Domhnall, of course." Greogair laughed, as if Osrith knew who he meant, as if she had been there at a time long ago when had been conceived for the soon-to-be King of Alba.